The poor student married a 71-year-old millionaire. 7 days later, he was shocked by what he witnessed. Nawir Nam, a 24-year-old young man, lives in a small house on the edge of the city, where the wind blows through the old doors, and the musty smell of humid rainy days permeates every wall. Every day he goes to work. While studying and working to make a living, as a final-year law student, Nam always dreamed of becoming a lawyer successful, but currently, I am burdened by mounting debts. My father passed away a few years ago, leaving the family in dire straits, and my mother is struggling with chronic heart disease. Mr. Lin's daughter is in her first year of college, and her education expenses make the situation even more difficult. Nam was sitting in a familiar coffee shop near school, focusing on the laptop screen with unfinished research when his phone rang. On the other end of the line was a deep and authoritative voice, of a man. The woman, Nawir Nam, right? Her voice was clear, although not loud, but full confidence. Nam stopped, surprised by this direct name calling. He had never heard that voice before. Yes, it is me. Who is talking? Nam answered, trying to be polite. I am Nawir Kim. You probably don't know me, but I know your situation very well. I want to meet you to discuss. Honor, this opportunity can change your life. We can meet at 7 o'clock tonight, at the Sunshine Restaurant. I don't want to explain over the phone, but the call ended before Nam could finish sentence. He looked confusedly at the phone screen, his mind full of questions. Who is Nawir Kim? Why we know about his situation, and more importantly what she wants from him. In the evening, after a day of working at a small restaurant, Nam decided to go to the appointment. The Sunshine Restaurant is located in the center of the city, with bright sunlight. Bright yellow lights shined from the large glass windows. He hesitated to enter, feeling like he didn't belong. Coming to a luxurious place like this, the waiter led him to a small table in a hidden corner. Sitting there was an older woman, her silver hair neatly tied in a bun, wearing a delicate black dress. Don't wear too much makeup, but your charisma exudes power and wealth. Sit down, Mrs. Kim said without looking. Her looked up, his eyes still glued to the phone in front of him. Nam sat down, feeling like he was facing a strict professor. He took a deep breath and waited for her to speak. Do you know why I called you here? No. She raised her sharp eyes and looked straight at him. Nam felt like she could see through everything. Me thoughts. Honestly, I don't know, but I want to hear her say. Nam answered, trying to keep his voice calm. Mrs. Kim took a sip of tea before speaking. I learned about you. A law student, promising, but is drowning in debt. His mother is sick, his sister needs money for school, and he works despite working hard. The future is still unclear. Is that right? Nam nodded, surprised because she knew his situation so well. I have a suggestion for you to continue. It will solve all of your financial problems. In return, you only need to do one thing: marry me. Nam was so surprised that he couldn't speak words. He stared at her, sure that he had just misheard what she said. I want you to be my husband, Mrs. Kim said in a calm voice, as if discussing a business contract. This is not a matter of love, but of a mutually beneficial agreement. I will pay off all your debts and ensure your mother has the conditions for medical treatment best, and provide for your sister until she graduates. In return, you will become my legal husband within 2 years. Nam laughed, even though he himself did not find this funny. Are you serious? I'm still young, and you? Yes, I'm nearly 50 years older than you. But age is not an issue here. I need a companion, a name to protect my inheritance. And you need money. Think about it. How many opportunities like this come to a person like you? Nam shook his head, feeling as if being dragged into an absurd story. But why me? You can find anyone. Mrs. Kim leaned over, cold eyes forward. Because you are the perfect person for my plan. You have nothing to lose, and more importantly, you are desperate. Nam feels his pride is insulted, but Mrs. Kim was right. He had nothing to lose. After a moment of silence, she placed a business card on the table and pushed it towards him. Nam, this is my number. If you agree, call, but don't hesitate too long. This opportunity won't wait forever. Nam left the restaurant in a confused mood. Mrs. Kim's suggestion kept lingering in his mind. His head all night long. For the first time in his life he couldn't sleep. He kept tossing and turning, thinking about what she said in the morning. Next day, during a simple meal with his mother and sister, he decided to share everything. His mother remained silent for a long time after listening to him. Her face looked tired, but her eyes were full of sympathy. Honey, I don't want to force you to do anything against your conscience, but if she really can help, if we can get out of this difficulty, maybe you should think seriously. Nam looked at his mother and felt his heart ache. He knew she said that not because she wanted to take advantage of him, but because she had no other way to do it. Help the family. The next day Nam called Mrs. Kim. I agreed. He spoke in a low voice but firmly. Very well, she answered briefly. Prepare for the wedding to take place sooner than you think. Nawir Nam did not know what he had accepted, what he was stepping into when he agreed to Mrs. Nawir Kim's proposal. The wedding took place just after a week, so quickly, that he didn't have time to feel or think. It was a single ceremony simply at a notary office, luxurious with no wedding hoa, no music with only a few witnesses, Mrs. Kim's personal lawyer, a notary, and a young woman standing quietly next to her. Probably her assistant. Nam wore a suit that Mrs. Kim had prepared. It fit but felt Strange was like a puppet in a big play, of which she was the controller. When the witness finished reading the oath and request, both signed, and the marriage certificate, Nam hesitated for a second, but his eyes were cold. Mrs. Kim's sadness reminded him of the reason he was here. His mother, his sisters, and the heavy debts he was incurring. His shoulder held the signature pen. The black ink pen touching the paper, marking the decision that changed his whole life. Congratulating him, Mrs. Kim said. A thin smile appeared on Tang's lips. Now you are officially my husband, she said with her voice was cold, as if this meant nothing to her, but to Nam, a strange feeling arose in his heart. He didn't know if it was relief for saving his family, or fear for the uncertain future ahead. That evening, Mrs. Kim took Nam back to her villa, from outside the house. The house overwhelmed Nam. It was a massive structure with a large black iron gate leading onto a paved road. Long. On both sides are rows of neatly trimmed trees. The villa is located deep inside, with tall white walls and long glass windows, but the surrounding air has a cold look, as if this house lacks the breath of life. The main door opens, and Nam is led into a distant space hoa, but it was strangely silent. A fake maid bowed to Mrs. Kim, then led Nam to his private room, a large room with a Sai Su Buddhist bed, a leather sofa and a window overlooking the garden. Behind, everything was perfect, but Nam didn't feel any warmth. The air in the room was cold not because of the temperature, but because of the absence of people. This will be your room, Mrs. Kim said, standing in front of the room. I don't ask for much. Just you to act as a husband when necessary. We will not interfere in each other's private lives. I think this will be easy for both of us, Nam nodding. Not knowing how to answer, Mrs. Kim looked at him for a second more, then turned around and left. Leaving Nam alone in the large room, he sat down on the bed, her hand unconsciously stroking the bedsheet with silk. Everything here is beautiful and expensive, but Nam feels like he is imprisoned in a golden cage. The first dinner at the villa made that feeling even clearer. The meal was so long that Nam had to look up to see Mrs. Kim sitting at the top. On the other side, the dish was served by a professional chef. Industry, and the maids moving like ghosts. Mrs. Kim quietly cut her steak with silver knife, shining cold eyes looking over the dining table. Are you familiar with this place? She asked in a calm but imposing voice, still a bit strange. Nam admitted, the house is too big. I'm afraid I will lost your way. Mrs. Kim smiled faintly. And you'll either get used to it or not. Anyway, you don't need to go far. You have everything you needed right here. Nam didn't answer. He just focused on eating, trying not to pay attention to the strange silence that was covering him, but he couldn't help but think that something wasn't right. Things here are so perfect and so clean. It's as if AI is trying to hide something. The following days next, Nam trying to get used to his new life. He no longer had to worry about money or debt, but the feeling of being lost in the villa did not lessen. He began to pay attention to the small details, the wings, the locked doors, the long dark hallways, and the way the maids always avoided my Isham. They talked to each other in whispers, sometimes stopping when they saw him approaching. One night, unable to sleep, Nam decided to walk around the villa. He walked past the ancient paintings hanging on the wall, thick carpets spread out on the wooden floor. When passing through a dark hallway, he stopped first a large wooden door. It was different from the other doors. It seemed older with a shiny brass lock. He tried turning the doorknob, but it was locked tightly. What are you doing here? The voice said. Suddenly sounded behind him, startling Nam. Turning around, Mrs. Kim stood there in silk pajamas, her face still maintaining her usual cold expression. It's nothing, I'm just walking around making awkward answers. Don't wander around at night, she said in a warning tone. There are places that aren't for you. Nam didn't dare to ask more, just nodded and left. But a big question began to appear in his heart. What was Mrs. Kim hiding, and why she warned him again in such a strange way? In the following days, Nam's curiosity grew. He couldn't stop thinking about the locked door, and Mrs. Kim's cold eyes when warning him. But at the same time, he also realized that he had no other choice but to follow the hidden rulers in this house. He feels like a guest, unwelcome in his own marriage, but deep inside, he knows that this is only the beginning for the strange things that are about to happen. waiting for him. The days of living in Mrs. Nguyen Kim's big villa made Nam even more frustrated, confused. Every morning he woke up in a cold room, walked through long silent hallways to the dining room, where Mrs. Kim always sat there drinking tea and reading the newspaper, each conversation between them only lasting a few minutes. And hardly went beyond social questions. She always kept both spatial and emotional distance. Esh felt as if Nam was just a part of her plan, a hired tool to carry out the task. But what worried Nam the most was the growing oppressive feeling. This house was like a prison. Giant maze, with countless hidden corners. The help staff, although polite and professional, always avoiding his eyes, sometimes whispering half-hearted stories. When he thinks he's not paying attention, every little detail in the villa makes Nam feel that there is something very wrong, hidden, and that he couldn't calm down. One night, unable to sleep, Nam decided to leave the room to find some air. The moonlight passed through the large window, illuminating the cold stone-paved hallway. Nam walked slowly, letting the sound of his footsteps blend into the silence of the villa. As he passed the room with the large locked wooden door, where Mrs. Kim had warned him not to approach, a strong urge arrested his arms. He stopped, his eyes focused intently on the shiny brass lock. Nam reached out to touch the doorknob. A cold feeling passed through his skin, making him suddenly withdraw his hand, but curiosity not letting him go. For a moment he decided to take a risk. He took a few steps back to observe the action. Wandering around, there was no one. The silence covering him made Nam feel like the whole world was sleeping peacefully, only he was awake. Rummaging through his memory, Nam remembered a small key, which he accidentally found in Mrs. Kim's desk drawer. A few days ago, he didn't know what the key was for, nothing, but its shape seemed to match the lock in front of him. Nam returned to his room, found the key in his coat pocket. He held it in his hands, felt the cold heaviness of the metal, then turned back at Kia's door. When Nam inserted the key into the lock, a light clicking sound rang out in the quiet space, causing her was startled. His heart was pounding, but his hand still held firmly. He turned the doorknob and gently pushed the door open, revealing a dark room. The air inside smelled musty and old. Nam walked in and turned on the door. Flashlight from my phone to illuminate. The room is an archive full of old objects, pictures, papers and other things, personal items covered in dust. Nam went deep inside. His eyes glanced over each shelf. There was a small desk in the corner of the room, on which was placed a stack of papers tied with a leather strap. When Nam opened it, he saw business documents, contracts and some letters handwritten in sharp handwriting. On a letter especially attracted his attention. The letter was sent to his father with Mrs. Kim's signature. The content of the letter was full of heavy accusations. She accused his father had defrauded her husband. She was in a big business deal, causing her family to lose all of their assets, and pushing her husband into a path of collapse. Mrs. wrote that her husband had passed away from a heart attack, due to the financial pressure caused by Nam's father, and she vowed to take revenge at any cost. Nam felt his chest tighten and things began to become clearer. This marriage was not a random arrangement, but part of a revenge plan that lasted for many years. Ms. Kim, you not only want to save your inheritance, but also want to destroy my family, like how Mrs. Cho said my family did to her. When Nam was still shocked by what he discovered, hearing noises in the hallway, he quickly turned off the flashlight and tried to keep quiet. Footsteps getting closer and closer. Nam's heart was beating wildly as the door slowly opened. Mrs. Kim stood there with cold eyes shining straight at him. What do you think you are doing here? She spoke with a sharp voice like a knife. Nam stuttered, trying to looking for an explanation, but Mrs. Kim's eyes made it clear that she was not waiting for Min's excuse. He had crossed the line, for example. Nam said, entering the room slowly but powerfully. Do you think you have the right to rummage through my past? Why? Are you taking revenge on me because of my father? Nam asked with a trembling voice. She concluded. Kissed me just to continue her hatred. Mrs. Kim was silent for a moment, then smiled faintly. You are smarter than me thought. Yes, I have been planning this for a long time. You are just a tool, Nam, part of my game, but I did nothing. Nam bounced back. I have nothing to do with what my father do. Why did you drag me into this? Because you carry his bloodline, she replied with cold eyes, and because I want your family to suffer what my family has gone through. Nam felt like the ground beneath his feet collapsed. He didn't know what to do or say. He felt betrayed and angry. He couldn't believe that he had become a pawn in her cruel plan.